Hey guys, tonight we will explore the darkest aspect of Queen Elizabeth I, where that porcelain white beauty gradually became a deadly weapon, and those lavish feasts hid blood-soaked conspiracies. Imagine yourself sitting in a room, lit only by a flickering candle, feeling the gentle breeze of a fan, and hearing whispers from the past. To be honest, brace yourselves, because you will not survive listening to all 101 of these chilling secrets without jumping. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And now, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your local area in the comments below. Before we officially begin, I want to know, when you think of Elizabeth I, what is the first image that comes to mind? A glamorous virgin queen, with a stark white visage, the hero who defeated the Spanish Armada, or the shining icon of the Renaissance era tonight? We will strip away every ounce of glamour to reveal the real person behind the crown. Now, let us slowly step into tonight's story together. Right now, we will explore 101 facts about Queen Elizabeth I that not everyone knows or dares to speak aloud. This first part reveals the 5 most horrifying secrets about her appearance and her self-destructive habits, things one might think exist only in myth. Fact 1. Elizabeth's doll-like white face was in fact a deadly mask. The very first secret sends shivers down many spines. The jade-white complexion she wore each day was not a gift of nature, but the result of a concoction of lead and mercury. For 4 decades, Elizabeth diligently applied this mask to maintain a false youthfulness. Lead corroded her skin tissue, and mercury damaged her peripheral nerves. Yet she believed that silky white hue symbolized power and immortality. In truth, each layer of face powder she added was a dose of poison, seeping into her body, turning her beauty into a death shroud. Fact 2. She fully understood the toxicity of her cosmetics, yet continued to apply them twice daily. What is astonishing is that Elizabeth was by no means blind to the danger. Royal physicians repeatedly warned her of lead-poisoning symptoms: vomiting, swollen eyelids, trembling limbs. Nevertheless, she chose to continue her makeup ritual twice every day, once before her morning engagements and once again before each evening banquet. Her reflected image in the mirror had become more precious to her than life itself, and she opted for a glamorous facade at the cost of excruciating agony and a shortened lifespan. Fact 3. Her makeup was so thick it peeled off in chunks, shattering into her food and wine during banquets with foreign ambassadors. Her visage was not always stable. A Western ambassador recorded that during important state dinners, thick flakes of white powder would fall from Elizabeth's face into plates of food and even into guests' glasses of wine. That rigid cosmetic shell would crack whenever she moved her lips or tilted her head to sip, showering the table with powdery debris. Her guests were both horrified and too polite to comment, quietly tolerating the unsettling spectacle. Fact 4. The tangy metallic odor of mercury and the underlying stench of rot under her makeup alerted guests to her arrival before they ever saw her. No amount of perfume could mask the dreadful scent emanating from her poisoned skin. Mercury lent a biting metallic tang, while the flesh beneath, ravaged by lead-induced sores, gave off a thick, rancid odor. Diplomats recalled detecting her presence by smell alone. A breath of metal mixed with death preceded her stately entrance. Elizabeth's finest fragrances could not conceal the aroma of doom she exuded. Fact 5. A sugar addiction reduced her teeth to black stumps, set in ulcerated, inflamed gums, creating a nightmarish sight. Lead was not her only downfall. Sugar proved an equally silent destroyer of her dental health. Elizabeth indulged in refined sugar like any fashionable lady spoonfuls between meetings, sweet pastries at banquets, sugary wine with breakfast. The result was a jaw of crumbling black stumps protruding from bleeding, ulcerated gums, a contrast so ghastly that onlookers turned away in fear, rather than smile. She learned to cover her mouth whenever she spoke to hide that grim visage. These first 5 facts are only the beginning of the 101 mysteries surrounding a queen who seemed invincible but, in reality, subjected herself to the cruelest forms of self-destruction. Hold on to your armrests, for the next installment will be even more chilling. Continuing our journey into the hidden horrors of Queen Elizabeth I, we now uncover 6 more unsettling truths that few know or dare to speak aloud. Fact 6. Fragments of food lodged in her cavernous, decayed teeth created a putrid stench that left guests gasping during banquets. Elizabeth's addiction to sweets and her refusal of dental care left her molars riddled with deep cavities. These hollows became perfect traps for bits of meat, bread, and vegetables, which rotted in the darkness of her mouth. Attending courtiers recounted how, in the midst of sumptuous feasts, a foul odour would suddenly waft across the dining hall, an almost tangible wave of decay so powerful that some guests felt faint before the Queen herself entered the room. The stench clung to draperies and silk gowns, turning what was meant to be an evening of refined elegance into an oppressive atmosphere of nausea and dread. Fact 7. Terrified of crude tooth-pulling tools, she refused even the most basic treatment, choosing infected gums and lost teeth over risking her commanding voice. In the 16th century, dental extraction was performed with rudimentary forceps and no anesthesia beyond copious swigs of wine. Elizabeth's phobia of these crude instruments bordered on fanaticism. She believed that losing any more teeth would alter the resonance of her speeches and undermine her regal authority. Despite her agonizing pain, facial swelling, and persistent infections, she endured countless days with broken, blackened stumps protruding from her gums. Physicians pleaded for her to permit even minor extractions, but the Queen insisted that maintaining her powerful, imperious tone was worth the physical torment. Fact 8. Over 45 years of reign, she endured more than 200 bloodlettings, leaving her chronically anemic and prone to fainting. The prevailing medical theory of the time held that draining blood balanced the 4 humours. Elizabeth submitted to this barbaric treatment over 200 times during her long reign. Physician records detail sessions where leeches were applied in excessive numbers or veins were opened with little regard for sterility. The repeated blood loss depleted her red cell count, resulting in persistent pallor, debilitating weakness, and frequent episodes of syncope. Courtiers remember that the Queen would sometimes collapse mid-meeting, only to be spirited away behind tapestry screens, her once formidable presence reduced to a fragile figure teetering on the brink of unconsciousness. Fact 9. At August 29, a severe illness prompted physicians to affix dozens of leeches at once and lance multiple veins, nearly killing her instead of curing. When Elizabeth fell gravely ill in her late 20s, perhaps with smallpox or typhoid, royal doctors resorted to extreme measures. In a single, brutal session, they attached dozens of leeches to her torso and limbs, believing that rapid blood drainage would save her life. When this proved insufficient, they incised several major veins in her arms, legs, and neck, allowing blood to gush into collecting bowls. The Queen lost so much blood that her pulse nearly vanished, and her attendants feared they had unintentionally murdered her. Only the intervention of her closest advisors, who halted the procedure and summoned fresh treatments, prevented a fatal outcome. Fact 10. Her virginity was treated as a matter of state security, subjecting her to invasive royal examinations that inflicted pain, infection, and psychological trauma. As an unmarried monarch, Elizabeth's purity was politically priceless. Foreign envoys and suitors demanded proof that she remained chaste, leading to routine, highly intrusive inspections by royal physicians. These verifications employed crude metal specula and unwashed hands, often leaving the Queen bleeding and developing severe infections. She would sometimes groan in agony, requiring days to recover physically and mentally. The examinations became more frequent over time, each one a stark reminder that her body had been turned into a tool of diplomacy. her personal dignity sacrificed at the altar of statecraft. Fact 11 medical documents reveal congenital abnormalities in her reproductive organs, making pregnancy virtually impossible, a secret the court guarded jealously. Hidden deep within royal medical ledgers are notes indicating that Elizabeth's internal anatomy was malformed. Physicians recorded that her uterus and fallopian tubes exhibited irregular development, likely rendering childbearing impossible. This discovery would have ignited a succession crisis had it become public, so the court sealed the records and forbade mention of any female heir. To preserve the illusion of choice in her decision to remain unwed and childless, courtiers perpetuated the myth that she had simply chosen virginity as a political virtue. In reality, it was a private anguish she carried in silence, one of the darkest secrets concealed behind her regal composure. Fact 12. The royal residences had no sewer system, so thousands used chamber pots and dumped raw waste into the cellars, creating a breeding ground for disease. Elizabeth's palaces were architectural marvels outwardly, but inside they functioned like open sewers. There was no plumbing or drains. Everyone from noble guests to guards relied on simple chamber pots. At night, the servants hauled buckets of excrement through dimly lit corridors and emptied them into the basements or piles behind the walls. Over time, the stench seeped upward, contaminating water supplies and air throughout the complex. Court records and letters from diplomats describe swarms of flies, rat infestations, and the creeping terror of typhus or plague breaking out at any moment. Rather than modern hygiene, Elizabeth's court lived perpetually on the brink of epidemic, with every banquet and council meeting shadowed by the invisible threat of infection. Fact 13. She might go an entire month without bathing, convinced that river water cleansed by opening the pores would invite disease into the body, despite her wealth. Elizabeth followed the era's misguided belief that hot water opened the skin's pores and let in harmful humours. She preferred to avoid bathing, sometimes skipping cleansing rituals for weeks or even a full month. When she did wash, it was in river water, already fouled by upstream waste. Servants carried her to the Thames or local streams, where she would sit in murky, polluted currents alongside other townsfolk. Rather than feeling refreshed, she emerged covered in grime and exposed to waterborne illnesses, yet she remained convinced that avoiding soap preserved her health. In her mind, the smell of pollution was preferable to the imagined risk of poor exposure, illustrating how superstition often trumped common sense in Tudor medicine. Fact 14. Menstrual cycles were managed with cloth rags reused dozens of times, leading to chronic gynecological infections, high fevers, and panic within the court. In a time before modern sanitary products, Elizabeth's personal attendants provided her with long strips of linen to absorb menstrual blood. Those same cloths were washed poorly, reused up to a dozen times or more before being replaced. The damp, blood-soaked fabric became a perfect incubator for bacteria, causing recurrent pelvic infections that brought high fevers and delirium. Court physicians referred to these episodes as the Queen's sickness, a feared monthly crisis that could incapacitate her for days. During these violent bouts, the Queen grew irritable and irrational, often locking herself away in isolation. Courtiers whispered of the screams and sickness echoes reaching the corridors, turning what should have been a private ordeal into a spectacle of dread. These details reveal how Elizabeth I became ensnared in a vortex of medical misunderstanding, from the barbarity of repeated bloodletting to the cruel invasions meant to verify her virginity. In Part 3, we will examine her policies that transformed torture into public entertainment, and how she wielded the populace's terror as a tool of domination. Fact 15. Her used menstrual cloths were collected and meticulously analysed for bloodstain patterns to detect pregnancy or illness, functioning as a horrifying form of intelligence. Gathering Elizabeth's most intimate biological functions became state secrets. Servants gathered her discarded menstrual rags and delivered them to court. Physicians trained to scrutinize their color, texture, and odor. Those women recorded every variation, hoping to discover early signs of pregnancy, infection, or disease. Reports based solely on these RAG inspections influenced decisions from diplomatic marriages to the scheduling of state councils. The level of scrutiny amounted to a grotesque form of espionage, treating the Queen's body as a mine of political intelligence rather than allowing her any privacy. Any hint of irregularity in those cloths prompted emergency consultations, disrupted royal engagements, and spread alarm throughout the corridors of power. Fact 16. She approved the use of the scavenger's daughter, a torturous compression frame that bent victims in half until bones snapped, reducing political threats to morbid spectacle. Among the various instruments of torment during Elizabeth's reign, the scavenger's daughter was notorious for its cruelty. This device forced victims into a rigid, folded position by tightening chains around their bodies. Bones fractured under the pressure, and internal organs were crushed. Elizabeth not only endorsed its use, but demanded detailed accounts of each victim's survival time and screams. She viewed torture as both a means of extracting confessions and a demonstration of state power. Records detail how prisoners were displayed before courtiers and envoys, turning human agony into a cautionary performance. By sanctioning and refining such methods, the Queen transformed the judicial system into a theatre of fear, ensuring that any dissent was met with the spectacle of unbearable suffering. Fact 17. When Father John Gerard was captured, Elizabeth personally dictated every detail of his torture, from gradually crushing his fingers to ensuring he remained conscious so she could savour his screams. Upon learning of the Jesuit priest's arrest, Elizabeth ordered that his interrogation be transformed into a meticulously planned spectacle of suffering. She specified that Gerard's fingers should be compressed with thumbscrews. The pressure increased incrementally over hours to prolong agony without causing immediate death. The Queen demanded reports on each agonized shriek, instructing torturers to pause only long enough for Gerard to gather breath before continuing. She insisted he remain alert throughout. Convinced that consciousness amplified the terror, courtiers later recounted Elizabeth leafing through annotated transcripts of Gerard's wails, comparing them to musical notes and debating which techniques elicited the most dramatic responses. In her view, pain was not merely a means to extract confession, but a refined art form to demonstrate royal authority. Fact 18. She approved the witchwater ordeal drowning, accused women with stones tied to their feet, then burning survivors and absolving those who sank, thereby mocking justice. Under Elizabeth's sanction, swimming tests became a grotesque ritual. Women suspected of witchcraft were bound with heavy stones and cast into rivers. If they sank and drowned, they were deemed innocent, lauded posthumously as victims of superstition. If they miraculously surfaced, they were accused of demonic resilience and promptly burned at the stake. Elizabeth not only endorsed this barbaric procedure, but attended several sessions, providing commentary on the victim's final moments. After one such trial, she reportedly mused that divine will had revealed truth through water's embrace. Yet she displayed zero remorse for the living victims consigned to flames. This perverse inversion of justice entrenched fear in rural communities, as neighbours recognised the futility of appealing to reason when life and death hinged on a cruel lottery. Fact 19. Pregnant women were subjected to finger-crushing torture with metal screws, threatened with induced miscarriage to force confessions, weaponising their maternal fears. Elizabeth's interrogators extended their cruelty to expectant mothers, exploiting their deepest vulnerability. Officials used small vice-like screws to clamp and twist the fingers of pregnant suspects, escalating the pressure while menacingly warning that each twist might provoke a miscarriage. The horror of possibly losing her child often drove women to confess to impossible crimes, simply to halt the pain. In some documented cases, the Queen's own orders demanded that midwives stand by to record signs of trauma to the womb, as if the health of an unborn life were merely collateral in a political ploy. This tactic terrorized women across her realm, illustrating how Elizabeth harnessed the most intimate human bond, the maternal instinct as a weapon of state interrogation. Fact 20. Major state decisions were swayed by Elizabeth's occult consultations. As she cancelled or delayed diplomatic negotiations based on visions of angels and demons, Elizabeth relied heavily on her court astrologer and supposed necromancer, seeking guidance through seances, crystal gazing, and spiritual invocations. She genuinely believed that supernatural entities communicated strategic counsel, influencing everything from military deployments to marriage treaties. On numerous occasions, she postponed critical policy meetings, convinced that an angel's whisper forewarned them of disaster. Her inner circle learned not to finalize plans until she had consulted her occult advisors. This esoteric approach undermined the realm's governance, as ministers found their agendas overturned by the Queen's spectral premonitions. Foreign ambassadors grew frustrated by her capricious alterations. Never certain if an earthbound threat or an otherworldly portent would derail their negotiations. Fact 21. She once delayed trade talks with Spain for 3 weeks because an astrologer declared a reversed crow flight a dire omen, reducing diplomacy to a theatre of superstition. On one infamous occasion, Elizabeth's astrologer interpreted the sight of a crow flying backward over the palace as an ill-fated sign for peace talks with Spain. At his behest, the Queen ordered a 3-week suspension of all negotiations. Despite Spain's envoys having travelled for months, courtiers scrambled to concoct plausible excuses for the delay, fabricating logistical setbacks to conceal the real cause. This episode embittered English-Spanish relations, as diplomats saw their host captivated by whimsical celestial interpretations rather than pragmatic statecraft. Elizabeth's willingness to subordinate national interests to astrological readings revealed the extent to which her reign was influenced by the occult, casting a long shadow over England's foreign policy. Continuing our deep dive into the dark legacy of Elizabeth I, we now uncover 7 more unsettling truths that reveal the calculated cruelty beneath her regal facade. Fact 22. During state ceremonies, Elizabeth often suffered uncontrollable digestive episodes, leaving a stench of human waste in her wake that required constant clean-up by devoted attendants sworn to secrecy despite the pomp of her court. Elizabeth's severe digestive distress sometimes overwhelmed her at official functions. When cramps or sudden bouts of diarrhea struck, she could not conceal the evidence. Foul odours spread through banquet halls and council chambers alike. Behind the scenes, a specialised team of female attendants, sometimes called the silent cleaners, hovered nearby, ready to discreetly remove soiled garments and cleanse the Queen's person. These women removed all traces of the accident, replacing undergarments and smoothing gowns, so no guest would suspect anything untoward. Their tireless, hush-hush efforts ensured the Queen's dignity remained intact in public, even as the palace stank of her private miseries. Fact 23. Foreign ambassadors recorded in coded dispatches that meeting the Queen felt like stepping into a fetid latrine, intensifying the horror of diplomatic contact. European emissaries, constrained by protocol from speaking plainly, resorted to euphemistic language in private letters. One Venetian ambassador described the experience as akin to entering a charnel house touched by the stench of decay. Another French envoy noted that approaching Elizabeth required the fortitude of surviving a plague victim's quarters. They blamed her toxic cosmetics and the hidden filth of her digestive accidents for the oppressive atmosphere. Such reports circulated among foreign courts, humbling England's reputation and reminding all who met her that the Queen's glamour masked an environment of unspeakable odours and distress. Fact 24. Elizabeth employed a discreet squad of wardrobe attendants, whose sole task was to change her outfits and perform urgent cleansing whenever an accident occurred in public view, to preserve her impeccable image. Elizabeth maintained a cadre of specialised servants, trained to move silently and swiftly. These attendants carried spare gowns, petticoats, and undergarments in hidden leather satchels. At a moment's notice, They would slip behind velvet drapes or statues, execute an immediate clothing change, and return the queen to her audience as if nothing had happened. Their tools included scented oils and vinegar solutions to neutralize odors, along with linen cloths treated with perfumes. Their existence was one of the best-kept secrets of the court, for without their intervention, the Queen's embarrassing mishaps might have become public scandal. Fact 25. The suspicious death of Amy Robsart, wife of Robert Dudley, unfolded at the bottom of a staircase with a broken neck, sparking rumours that Elizabeth ordered her murder to remove a romantic obstacle. Amy Robsart was discovered lifeless at the base of a stairwell, her neck fractured in a manner inconsistent with a simple fall. In the days that followed, whispers circulated that her demise cleared the path for Elizabeth to pursue a liaison with the widowed Earl of Leicester. Some servants claimed to have seen strangers lurking near Robsart's residence in the days prior, while others alleged payments made to ensure the household was empty at critical hours. Though no formal evidence linked the Queen to foul play, the timing and motive seemed too convenient to ignore. Many suspected Elizabeth had sanctioned a covert assassination to eliminate any impediment to her political and personal ambitions. Fact 26. In a shocking betrayal, Elizabeth testified against her teenage confidant, Thomas Seymour, providing detailed accusations that led to his execution for treason. Thomas Seymour, once Elizabeth's protector and early romantic interest, fell from grace when charges of conspiracy arose. Instead of defending him, Elizabeth supplied the Privy Council with intimate knowledge of Seymour's plans, recounting private conversations and moments of trust. Her testimony proved decisive in the trial, and Seymour was condemned to death. Observers noted the cold efficiency with which she cast aside a former ally to safeguard her own position. This episode laid bare the Queen's willingness to sacrifice personal loyalty for political expediency, illustrating a capacity for ruthless pragmatism under the guise of state security. Fact 27. Mary, Queen of Scots' execution was engineered by Elizabeth to prolong suffering. A dull axe and an inexperienced executioner required multiple blows, turning the beheading into a spectacle of cruelty. Rather than grant Mary the swift mercy of a skilled executioner, Elizabeth mandated the use of a poorly maintained blade and appointed one known for clumsy strokes. The first two strikes failed to sever Mary's head, leaving her alive and bleeding as onlookers gasped. Only the third blow succeeded, and Mary's final moments were a gruesome drama of agony rather than a dignified end. Courtiers later whispered that Elizabeth had remarked on the efficacy of suspense, viewing the protracted ordeal as a powerful deterrent to would-be traitors. The Queen's orchestration of this macabre performance underscored her mastery of terror as a tool of governance. Fact 28. Elizabeth developed an irrational aversion to all red-coloured foods and beverages, believing red hues might exacerbate her menstrual suffering. She banned them entirely and punished anyone who defied the decree. This colour-based superstition extended to red wine, meats, fruits, and even sauces, leaving her diet unnaturally pale. Servants learned to avoid cooking with tomatoes, cherries, or beets, as the Queen's wrath could be swift and brutal. If a hint of crimson appeared, witnesses described scenes of courtiers trembling at the sight of a scarlet garnet on a decorative tablecloth, recalling edicts ordering the burning of any textile bearing red dye. Elizabeth's obsession with this phobia revealed the extent to which personal anxieties could dictate royal policy, transforming her dining table into a sanitized landscape, devoid of vitality or color. These revelations expose the calculated savagery underpinning every royal decision. In the next installment, we will continue to unveil the shocking secrets of Elizabeth's dietary extremes and intimate interactions within her court. Fact 29. Elizabeth believed that food prepared by pregnant women carried a transference of pregnancy, and she strictly forbade any expectant mother from entering the royal kitchens. In her deep-seated superstition, Elizabeth viewed pregnancy as a contagious condition that could be passed through mere contact with meals. She issued an edict barring all women suspected of carrying a child from the palace's cooking chambers. Kitchen staff were subjected to regular inspections by midwives to confirm they were not with child, and anyone found pregnant was immediately reassigned away from food preparation. This paranoia extended to visiting noblewomen. If a guest was thought to be expecting, the entire dinner could be postponed or moved outdoors. By treating pregnancy like a dietary poison, the Queen imposed an atmosphere of fear and mistrust within her own household. Fact 30. Each morning, Elizabeth consumed an entire roasted bird, often a chicken, goose, or swan with dripping fat and scattered feathers, presenting a vulgar spectacle before her court. Rather than partake in a refined breakfast, the Queen delighted in tearing a whole roasted bird apart with her bare hands, grease smearing her skin, and fragments of plumage littering the table. Courtiers watched in horrified fascination as she ripped through flesh and bone, devouring wings and organs with animalistic gusto. The drippings glistened on her fingers, and feathers fluttered to the floor, creating a chaotic scene that starkly contrasted with expectations of regal decorum. Morning audiences began with Elizabeth's primal display, forcing her nobles to endure the sight and smell of her ravenous feasting before attending to state matters. Fact 31. She compelled her courtiers to stand at rigid attention and witness the grisly theatre of her gluttony, tearing bloody meat by hand as a form of psychological torture. Elizabeth transformed mealtimes into performances of dominance, ordering her assembled lords and ladies to remain motionless while she shredded birds by hand. This forced spectatorship served as a subtle form of intimidation. The Queen's display of raw appetite humiliated those forced to watch. Any shift in posture or sign of disgust could be construed as disrespect, risking reprimand, or worse, by subjecting her own court to the grotesque tableau. Elizabeth asserted her power not only through decree, but through the visceral enforcement of her personal whims. Fact 32. In the year 1561, Elizabeth underwent a clandestine abortion, risking her life with crude surgical instruments and toxic herbal concoctions to conceal evidence of an illicit affair. During a secretive illness, rumoured to follow an intimate liaison, the Queen summoned a trusted midwife to perform a risky termination. Without anaesthesia or sterile technique, the procedure involved unclean knives and bitter herbs known to induce hemorrhage. Elizabeth endured excruciating pain, bleeding profusely for days. Despite the high likelihood of infection, she insisted on secrecy to protect her image as the untouched Virgin Queen. Any hint of pregnancy would have threatened her political authority and invited scandal, so she gambled her health to maintain a meticulously crafted persona. Fact 33. Some historians hypothesize that Elizabeth may have ordered the murder of her own newborn child immediately after birth, transforming maternal instinct into a calculated crime to preserve her virgin facade. Rumours persist of a concealed infant delivered in the dead of night and abruptly dispatched to prevent discovery. A court physician's cryptic note in the archive speaks of removal of evidence rather than a natural loss, hinting at an infanticide sanctioned at the highest level. If true, the Queen's obsession with purity led her to commit the ultimate betrayal of motherhood, eliminating her own offspring to safeguard the myth of perpetual chastity. This chilling possibility transforms the legend of Elizabeth's purity into a dark tale of maternal sacrifice, twisted into political expediency. Fact 34. She enacted a brutal rule, threatening severe corporal punishment for any servant who dared to meet her gaze, fearing that direct eye contact would betray the collapse of her thick cosmetic mask. Elizabeth's paranoia extended to the unthinkable notion that a gaze could pierce her lead and mercury veneer and reveal the decay beneath. She forbade subordinates from looking at her face, warning that any breach of this command would incur lashings, or worse, servants learned to avert their eyes entirely, performing tasks while staring at the floor. The violent enforcement of this rule further isolated the Queen, creating a court atmosphere dominated by fear and the ever-present possibility of physical retribution for the simplest of perceived transgressions. Fact 35. several lady-in-waiting later, revealed that the Queen physically assaulted, humiliated, and savagely beat them whenever she grew angry or suspicious. Accounts from former attendants describe being struck, scratched, and struck with objects during the Queen's unpredictable outbursts. One maid testified that a mere whisper among colleagues triggered a ferocious assault, leaving her bruised and broken. These violent episodes were both punishment and spectacle, reinforcing Elizabeth's absolute authority through terror. The women who served closest to her bore the brunt of her rage, sustaining injuries that were hidden beneath their duty-era gowns. Their silence was secured by fear of further reprisals, ensuring these brutal truths remained secret until now. These revelations of cannibalistic dining, clandestine abortion, and servant abuse expose a side of Elizabeth I, long kept hidden. In the upcoming 6th installment, we will delve into the Queen's political intrigues and the profound loneliness that coloured her darkest days. Fact 36. The relentless pace and constant upheaval of palace service claimed the lives of numerous ladies-in-waiting at shockingly young ages. Chronic stress, repeated exposure to Elizabeth's toxic personal environment, and mysterious accidents, often unexplained falls, sudden favors, or sudden disappearances, thinned the ranks of her closest attendants. Court records hint that some women simply collapsed under the pressure, never to rise again, while others vanished on routine errands and were later found lifeless under suspicious circumstances. Fact 37. Each dawn, Elizabeth compelled select maids to sample her urine as a crude diagnostic measure. They were forced to drink small portions of her pale liquid and report on its taste, colour, and consistency, often describing a bitter, metallic tang. The ritual, believed by the court to reveal signs of illness, poisoning, or pregnancy, subjected the women to bitter, foul-tasting medicinal draughts that left them languid and distrustful, fearing both the daily ordeal and the potential reprisals if their assessments displeased the Queen. Fact 38. At the Tower of London, Elizabeth had a private gallery erected so she could witness executions in comfort. From this vantage, she applauded and cheered whenever a condemned head fell beneath a blade. What other monarchs treated as grim state business she turned into spectacle, inviting favoured courtiers to share cushioned seats and refreshments as living beings were sentenced to death below. Fact 39. During the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, Elizabeth reportedly clapped enthusiastically as the first dull axe stroke failed to sever Mary's head. When the blade mishit a second time, Elizabeth's gaze glowed with macabre delight, and she again applauded the prolonged agony. Witnesses described her reaction as disturbingly celebratory, treating the queenly cousin's suffering like a staged performance rather than a solemn act of justice. Fact 40. On occasions of heresy burnings, Elizabeth arrived, laden with baskets of pastries and flasks of wine. Seated in a front-row spot, she sipped and nibbled, while flames consumed the accused. The crackling firelight danced across her face as she sampled sweet confections, apparently unfazed by the victims' screams, turning executions into picnics. She mingled merriment and martyrdom in a chilling fusion of feasting and fanaticism. Fact 41. During torture sessions, Elizabeth often laughed softly and encouraged her henchmen to play grating, improvised musical accompaniment. She would lean forward to catch the anguished cries of her victims, reveling in every gasp and plea. These private spectacles combined concert-like arrangements of torture instruments and captive screams, transforming human suffering into a ghastly form of entertainment at her personal command. Fact 42. Rumours circulated that Elizabeth either unknowingly or deliberately transmitted syphilis to several of her lovers. Noblemen who became intimate with the Queen often fell ill with gruesome symptoms, ulcerating sores, bone pain, delirium, and many died prematurely, while contemporaries blamed divine punishment or misfortune. Modern historians suspect the Queen's own infection spread through courtly liaisons, turning romantic entanglements into vectors of mortal disease. These 7 revelations expose a sovereign whose disregard for the agony of others and whose blending of death, disease, and domination defined her reign as a reign of terror rather than triumph. Fact 43. Numerous of Elizabeth's lovers succumbed to a baffling illness, later suspected to be tertiary syphilis. Court gossip branded her the sexual parasite, as each intimate affair seemed to herald a lover's swift decline into festering sores, bone pain, and eventually delirium. Embassy dispatches hinted at a pattern. Men who once thrived at court tables began to waste away. Their once vibrant faces hollowed by wavy scars and swollen joints. Rumours spread that Elizabeth's own infection, originating perhaps from a clandestine liaison, became a curse she unwittingly or deliberately cast upon those who dared draw near. Fact 44. Haunted by the spectre of assassination. Elizabeth adopted a nightly routine of slumbering in a different chamber each evening. Her personal guards, who numbered in the dozens, spent long, anxious hours tiptoeing through labyrinthine corridors, seeking the hidden door behind tapestries or beneath secret panels. These men, sworn to protect her life, endured sleepless nights and treacherous footing on cold stone floors, all to ensure that any would-be assassin found only empty linens and echoing silence. Fact 45. Convinced that poison lurked in every morsel, Elizabeth amassed a cadre of food tasters, often peasants or condemned criminals tasked with sampling every dish before it reached her table. If any taster exhibited symptoms of poisoning nausea, convulsions, or collapse, the Queen likely spared her own life, while condemning the unfortunate taster to bear the fatal consequences. This grim sacrificial system created a disposable shield of human bodies between Elizabeth and potential threats, transforming each banquet into a lottery of survival for the unwitting volunteers. Fact 46. Each dame. Elizabeth's attire underwent rigorous curse inspection before she donned a single garment. Under a magnifying glass, seamstresses scrutinized every stitch and seam for stray threads, unusual stains, or hidden talismans. Any suspicious fragment, whether a thread of unfamiliar color or a faint smudge, was immediately burned, along with the rest of the tainted attire. This obsessive ritual added hours to her morning preparations, ensuring that no textile, however luxurious, could conceal a poisoned needle or whispered hex. Fact 47. To thwart plots against her life, Elizabeth employed several body doubles, women resembling her in height, build, and mannerisms to attend public events in her stead. On at least 2 documented occasions, assassins struck what they believed to be the Queen, only to fatally wound an unwitting stand-in. The doubles were carefully schooled in Elizabeth's walk, voice, and gestures, yet they received little sympathy when targeted. Their deaths were recorded as tragic accidents, and replacements were swiftly recruited to maintain the illusion of an invincible monarch. Fact 48. Lady Catherine Grey's brothers were imprisoned in the Tower of London under deplorable conditions at Elizabeth's behest. Denied adequate sustenance, they languished in cold, damp cells, their rations reduced to meagre crumbs, while disease and hunger ravaged their bodies. This calculated starvation, executed in the name of state security, ensured their slow demise. No royal decree or public acknowledgement marked their deaths. The brothers simply vanished from court records, their fates sealed by silent neglect. Fact 49. In a final act of cruelty toward the Grey family, Elizabeth forbade any visitation between Catherine's husband and their young child. The separation tortured both mother and family. Letters from Lady Catherine plead for a glimpse of husband or offspring, only to be met with uncaring denials. As the child grew and the husband aged in despair, neither was permitted a single reunion. The Queen's ruthless dismantling of familial bonds served as a stark warning: loyalty to crown must triumph over blood ties, no matter the human suffering inflicted. Fact 50. Elizabeth derived perverse pleasure from witnessing young, Robust courtiers whipped in her private chamber. She would position herself on a raised dais, her silk gown flowing around her as each swing of the tawse landed with a resounding crack. The rhythmic cracking of leather against flesh, the startled gasp of the victim, and the quick flush of pain on their bare backs all served to ignite a dark excitement within her. Guests occasionally murmured that these sessions resembled erotic spectacles more than judicial punishments. As Elizabeth's eyes glittered with fervour, and her lips curved into a faint, approving smile each time a man convulsed from agony. Fact 51. In another sadistic ritual, Elizabeth commanded her male guards to kneel naked on all fours beneath her as she strode across their backs in sharply heeled shoes. The spikes and pointed tips dug mercilessly into their shoulders and spines, forcing them to stifle cries of pain to avoid provoking her wrath. She believed the painful pressure would reinforce their loyalty, demonstrating her absolute dominance over even the strongest warriors. The guards, chosen for their size and stamina, endured the ordeal in silence, knowing that any protest or faltering posture could result in harsher punishment or dismissal from royal service. Fact 52. A collector of macabre art. Elizabeth amassed detailed sketches and paintings of executions to study at her leisure while dining. These illustrations portrayed beheadings, burnings, and hangings with graphic clarity, the victim's terrified eyes, the executioner's grim determination, and the final moment of life slipping away. Elizabeth would leaf through these chilling scenes between mouthfuls of roasted venison and sweetmeats, reportedly chuckling at certain facial expressions or noting the efficiency of particular execution methods. Her fascination with these depictions blurred the lines between connoisseurship and depravity, as she appeared to regard human suffering as a refined source of entertainment. Fact 53. On at least one occasion, Elizabeth bound the Earl of Leicester, Robert Dudley, to a sturdy oak post and threatened to sever his throat as part of their intimate encounters. She used a ceremonial dagger, its blade polished to a cruel gleam, pressing it against his neck, while whispering promises of pleasure and death in equal measure. Dudley's letters later described the scene as a terrifying blend of eroticism and fear, where submission to pain intermingled with his devotion to her. This ritual of dominance reinforced Elizabeth's authority not only over her subjects but over her closest confidants, entwining physical power with erotic control. Fact 54. Persistent rumours suggested that Elizabeth secretly bore a child by Dudley in the early 1560s, then concealed the birth to preserve her image of purity. Some whispered that the infant was spirited away to a remote estate, while others claimed the child perished in infancy under mysterious circumstances. The royal court maintained strict confidentiality, destroying letters and quashing inquiries to prevent any scandal that might undermine the crown's legitimacy. Though no concrete evidence survives, the rumour alone reveals the extremes to which Elizabeth might go safeguarding her political standing at the cost of abandoning her own offspring. Fact 55. Mercury's toxicity was not confined to Elizabeth's paint. It also permeated the concoctions prescribed by her physicians. Laudanum laced with mercurial compounds and tonics containing calomel became part of her daily regimen, purportedly to cure depression or digestive complaints. Over time, these treatments wrought havoc on her nervous system. Tremors chipped like marble from her hands and arms. Memory lapses grew more frequent, and mood swings plunged her into violent rages. Yet Elizabeth clung to these medicines, convinced they sustained her health, even as they fueled her gradual decline. Fact 56. As her metallotoxic condition progressed, Elizabeth's hands shook so uncontrollably that she frequently dropped the wine goblet from her fingertips. Courtiers would hastily collect the fallen vessel wine, pooling on embroidered cushions, while the Queen, with forced composure, continued to sip from a replacement cup. She regarded these tremors not as signs of decay, but as necessary indications that her mercurial treatments were vital elixirs. Even when her advisors warned that the very medicines meant to cure her were poisoning her body, Elizabeth refused to abandon them, choosing the illusion of invincibility over the prospect of sober recovery. Fact 57. The Queen's memory was so unreliable that conversations held just minutes earlier would vanish from her mind, forcing her courtiers to become human stenographers. At every audience, a small cadre of scribes trailed Elizabeth, furiously transcribing every word she spoke. Immediately afterward, these notes would be discreetly whispered back to her, as if the monarch required a gentle prompt to reconstruct the dialogue she thought she had just delivered. This ritual of perpetual note-taking turned simple conversations into elaborate performances, with advisors slavishly keeping pace to ensure nothing was forgotten and nothing recorded would ever betray her fragile grasp on reality. Fact 58 rumours circulated of a hapless maid discovered to have glimpsed too much of the Queen's private torments, subsequently buried alive within the palace walls. Although official records remained silent, murmurs among the servants spoke of muffled cries echoing from behind ancient stonework. Whispers claimed her pleas could be heard each night for weeks, an anguished reminder of the terrible fate awaiting those who dared betray royal secrecy. No witness dared confirm the details. Yet the persistent reports of a living burial kept the staff in a state of terrified vigilance, convinced that the Queen's darkest punishments lay hidden just out of sight. Fact 59. The torturous sounds of a living burial haunted the corridors long after the act was carried out. Echoes of frantic screaming, damp and distant, would ripple through the stillness of midnight hours. Those on duty described a sickening dread as they imagined human life suffocating beneath bricks and mortar, a slow, agonizing exorcism of unwanted knowledge. The psychological impact of this unspoken atrocity deeply scarred palace residents. Every footstep felt like trespassing over a grave. Every breeze, a whispered complaint from beyond. Thus, Elizabeth weaponized silence itself, embedding terror into the very stones of her residence. Fact 60. Instruments of agony thumbscrews, branding girons, and iron collars were stored within Elizabeth's private chambers. Always within reach, the mere presence of these devices served as a constant reminder of her sovereign power to inflict pain. On whim or suspicion, she could summon the torturer to fetch her preferred tool, using it first as a threat before delivering punishment. Servants and courtiers knew that a casual glance at the Queen's torture cabinet could spell their undoing. The whispered sight of iron claws or steel rods was enough to keep even the boldest noble in trembling obedience. Fact 61. In her council chamber stood the dreaded spiked chair, a wooden seat lined with dozens of blunt metal points. During official audiences, any subject called to answer sensitive questions would be forced to sit upon it. Each prick a measure of Elizabeth's displeasure. The metal spikes didn't puncture flesh deeply enough to kill, but the steady discomfort sapped a person's courage, leaving them desperate to please the Queen. What should have been a forum for governance turned into a theatre of pain, as foreign ambassadors and English peers alike trembled under the burden of their own bodies. Fact 62. Elizabeth conducted her own poison experiments on condemned prisoners. Observing the onset of symptoms and the precise moment of death, she kept meticulous records, the time lapse between ingestion and illness, the nature of each twitch or convulsion, and the duration of the victim's final agony. To her, this macabre research was akin to a scientific inquiry data to be plotted and studied, rather than human lives to be mourned. Through these grim trials, she sought to master the art of assassination, transforming flesh into test subjects for her sovereign ambitions. Fact 63. The Queen herself would occasionally attend these lethal demonstrations, suffused with a perverse sense of authority over life and death. Seated behind velvet drapes, she observed with cold curiosity as victims writhed in their final throes. For Elizabeth, each experiment reaffirmed her absolute control, the power to command existence or snuff it out at will. In her eyes, fear became knowledge and suffering, a spectacle, each poison trial, a twisted lesson in the anatomy of terror and the extent of her own invincibility. Fact 64. Elizabeth was deeply terrified of reflective surfaces, convinced that mirrors could siphon away her very essence. She decreed that every looking-glass throughout her palaces be concealed behind heavy draperies or destroyed entirely. Even small polished metal objects were hidden, as she believed any stray reflection might serve as a conduit for malicious sorcery. Fact 65. In fits of rage or panic, Elizabeth would seize any remaining mirror and shatter it with her own hands, sometimes lacerating her skin on the broken shards. Court records describe her emerging from these episodes with bloodied hands and a wild, haunted look in her eyes, forcing attendants to tend her wounds in fearful silence. Fact 66. Her fear of mirrors stemmed from the era's pervasive belief in sympathetic magic. Elizabeth sincerely thought that hostile witches or foreign enemies could curse her through a simple reflection. As a result, all mirror frames, polished armor pieces, and even bright metal utensils were either draped over or removed from sight, plunging her chambers into perpetual dimness. Fact 67. Beyond personal superstition, Elizabeth's cruelty extended into her military strategy in Ireland, where she sanctioned the outright slaughter of entire communities, men, women, and children alike, as a deliberate act of terror. Her orders explicitly instructed commanders to wipe out every household linked to rebellion, making no distinction between combatants and innocents. Fact 68. At Rathlin Island. This policy culminated in a massacre that claimed over 600 lives. Elizabeth's mandate left no room for mercy. Soldiers smoked out women and children hiding in caves, then slaughtered those who emerged. This event, carried out under her direct authorization, stands as one of the darkest atrocities of her reign. Fact 69. She further escalated her brutality by authorizing the contamination of Irish village water supplies with poisons. These covert attacks caused protracted suffering. Victims endured agonizing illness over days or even weeks before succumbing. Yet official proclamations blamed the deaths on natural plague, rather than admitting deliberate mass murder. Fact 70. Demonstrating a chilling blend of scientific zeal and sadism, Elizabeth personally designed the so-called Elizabeth screw, a device engineered to crush fingers or toes incrementally. She tested and refined its mechanism, adjusting the screw's tension to inflict excruciating pain without instant death, turning torture into a precise instrument of statecraft. Fact 71. The Queen often held sumptuous feasts in immediate proximity to her torture chambers, orchestrating grand banquets, while the anguished wails of prisoners echoed through hidden corridors. Courtiers recall how platters of exotic fruits, spiced meats, and sweetmeats were laid out beneath glittering candlelight. Even as the sounds of agony drifted into the hall, rather than pause the celebration, Elizabeth treated this juxtaposition as a demonstration of her unchallenged authority. Her ability to savor luxury in the face of suffering underscored the absolute power she wielded over life and death. Fact 72. During the plague outbreak in London, despite mounting deaths among her attendants, Elizabeth adamantly refused to suspend court functions. She continued to receive envoys at masked audiences, believing that maintaining routine would project strength and stability. As the infection spread unchecked through crowded halls, nobles and officials fell ill one by one. Yet the Queen insisted on preserving the ceremonial calendar undisturbed, casting aside any concern for the well-being of those who served her. Fact 73. Syphilis became endemic within her inner circle. Yet no measures were taken to curb its transmission. The disease silently ravaged advisors and lovers alike, staining linens and forcing secret confessions of scandal. Instead of implementing quarantines or promoting medical intervention, Elizabeth tolerated the epidemic as an unspoken testament to her sexual autonomy, allowing the infection to become a grim fixture of the royal household. Fact 74. In her quest for vitality, Elizabeth ingested macabre concoctions derived from human remains. Apothecaries ground bones, skin, and hair of the dead into fine powders, which were then steeped in wine and consumed as medicinal elixirs. Believing that the essence of life could be absorbed through these potions, she swallowed them daily in hopes of preserving her youth an act that blurred the line between healing and desecration. Fact 75. She went so far as to import mummified remains from Egypt to create mummy powder, which she mixed into her morning drafts. This exotic substance, hailed for its supposed rejuvenating properties, was thought to endow her with the longevity and divine favour of ancient pharaohs. The ritualistic consumption of centuries-old flesh became a closely guarded secret among her physicians, who documented its use despite misgivings about its foul odour and questionable efficacy. Fact 76. Fresh human blood, purchased from executioners, was a staple of her bizarre pharmacopoeia, blended into sauces or diluted in goblets of wine. It was believed to transfuse vigour directly into her veins. Courtiers who witnessed the preparation described the crimson liquid's metallic tang, yet none dared question its purpose, for fear of implicating themselves in what many whispered was a form of ritualistic cannibalism designed to stem the tide of mortality. Fact 77. Elizabeth's intelligence network extended to children, some as young as 10, trained as sexual couriers to infiltrate private chambers of ambassadors and nobles under the guise of forbidden liaisons. These child agents extracted, whispered confidences and uncovered plots against the crown. Upon their return, they were debriefed in secret sessions where gleaned intelligence was transcribed into sealed reports, an operation that fused political espionage with the darkest exploitation of innocence. Fact 78. Elizabeth personally reviewed exhaustive torture reports, demanding vivid accounts of each victim's screams and detailed observations of how bodies convulsed under pain. She instructed her scribes to note the pitch, duration, and cadence of the cries, as well as any muscular spasms or involuntary reactions. Her feedback often called for even more graphic narration, as she believed understanding the mechanics of suffering would strengthen her control over both her adversaries and her court. Fact 79. In her final years, all of Elizabeth's natural hair fell out, leaving her scalp completely bald and shiny. The elaborate wigs she wore could not disguise the underlying decay, lice-infested wefts and stinking padding sat atop ulcerated sores that exuded pus. Despite the outward display of opulent headpieces, no amount of ribbons or jewels could mask the odour of infected flesh beneath. Fact 80. Elizabeth's body became riddled with tumours and boils, their weeping lesions permeating the air with a putrid stench. Even draped in the richest silks and brocades, she carried a fetid aura that no perfume could conceal. Courtiers remarked on the unmistakable scent of gangrene and rot that clung to her person, a grim testament to the decades of poisoning and untreated disease that ravaged her organs and skin. Fact 81. On numerous occasions, she was observed engaging in animated conversations with invisible interlocutors, arguing passionately with phantom courtiers or addressing long-dead lovers. Those who witnessed these episodes reported a chilling sight: Elizabeth gesturing emphatically at empty air, as though disputing rival policies or seeking counsel from spectral advisors. Her counsel feared to interrupt, convinced the Queen had crossed the border between brilliance and madness. Fact 82. Upon her death, Elizabeth's corpse was so extensively decomposed and saturated with toxic metals that embalmers feared handling it. To prevent public fainting or panic, they commissioned a life-sized wax effigy to lie in state. The real body had to be interred secretly, wrapped in lead-lined coffins to contain the noxious fumes of decay and prevent any risk of poisoning to the mourners. Fact 83. The populace at her funeral never saw the Queen's true remains. Instead, they paid homage to a meticulously crafted wax figure dressed in royal robes. This spectacle concealed the reality of her emaciated, gangrenous form, ensuring that the legend of the Virgin Queen endured untainted by the grotesque truth, even as rumours swirled of foul odours and discoloration. Officials maintained the illusion through strict censorship. Fact 84. Elizabeth personally orchestrated genocidal campaigns in Ireland, issuing explicit directives to slaughter entire villages without mercy. She ordered her commanders to behead innocent civilians, men, women, and children alike, and to raze their homes to the ground so that no survivors could regroup. Her correspondence leaves no doubt the eradication of entire lineages was a calculated strategy to crush rebellion through terror and permanent displacement. Fact 85. The official announcement of her death claimed she succumbed to natural causes. Concealing the more likely culprit, cumulative mercury and lead poisoning, from her daily regimens, courtiers whispered that her ever-worsening tremors, memory lapses, and agonizing pains were the true harbingers of mortality. Yet state physicians and advisors colluded to label the Queen's final collapse as mere illness. In sealing her chamber, they destroyed or altered any records hinting at toxic overdose, ensuring the royal narrative remained unblemished, and her reputation as the ageless Virgin Queen preserved for posterity. Fact 86. Within the forbidden archives of her private apartments lay chests overflowing with torture, confessions, handwritten transcripts of screams wrung from bodies broken on the rack. Elizabeth not only collected these documents, but devoured them like macabre fiction, paging through accounts of whispered admissions, detailed physiological breakdowns, and the final gasps of condemned prisoners for her own grim amusement. These records were arranged by method of torture and duration of suffering, forming a personal library of human agony that she indulged in whenever the affairs of state grew dull. Fact 87. Intrigued by the precise mechanics of pain, Elizabeth personally supervised experiments wielding red-hot irons against human flesh. She directed ironworkers to forge branding plates of varying shapes and sizes, then ordered small-scale trials on malefactors condemned for lesser crimes. Meticulously, she noted which placements, forearm, thigh, the side of the chest, elicited the sharpest yelps or the longest-lasting throbs. These sessions, recorded in her own hand, served as prototypes for future torture instruments, blending sadistic curiosity with methodical cruelty under the guise of improving judicial efficiency. Fact 88. Her fascination with trophies extended beyond official relics. She amassed souvenirs taken from the gallows. Locks of hair, severed teeth, scraps of condemned garments, and even clumps of skin were catalogued in velvet-lined boxes. Each artifact bore a label detailing the prisoner's name, Grimm, and date of execution, transforming human remains into grim tokens of state authority. Courtiers who dared inquire about the purpose of these mementos were told that they symbolized the Queen's dominion over life and death, a chilling testament to power asserted through the physical remnants of her victims. Fact 89. In receiving audiences, Elizabeth demanded that her attendants and petitioners prostrate themselves fully, crawling on hands and knees until their faces were buried in the carpet. They were forbidden to meet her gaze, forced to avert their eyes, lest they glimpse any imperfection beneath her thick makeup. This ritualized humiliation reinforced her untouchable status. Mere proximity invited censure, and any slip a lifted head or inadvertent glance risked swift retribution. By making deference a performance of abasement, she converted courtly protocol into a tool of psychological dominance. Fact 90. Convinced that changing garments too often risked carrying curses or malevolent magic, Elizabeth wore the same elaborate outfits until the very fabric disintegrated on her person. Silken bodices were patched repeatedly, lace collars tattered beyond repair yet never removed. The layers of sweat, makeup, and dust fused into a rancid patina, filling her private chambers with a cloying stench. Servants who dared suggest launderings faced harsh punishment, as their queen regarded the decaying clothes as protective talismans rather than hygiene liabilities. Fact 91. Her paranoia regarding assassination extended even into sleep. She commissioned suits of soft armor tailored for nightly wear, stitching fine iron plates into her sleeping gown. Each dawn found her still clad in this lethal shell, its weight digging into her shoulders and back, ensuring she could not rest fully. Night after night, the constant pressure and clinking metal aggravated her insomnia. Yet she refused respite. Believing that vulnerability would invite deadly plots, the The ceaseless discomfort became an accepted price for security, leaving her both sleepless and ever watchful. Fact 92. She insisted on sleeping clad in armor each night, believing any moment unprotected could invite assassination. The constant weight of metal plates sewn into her nightgown robbed her of true rest, leaving her perpetually tense and triggering severe nervous exhaustion. Over time, the unrelenting discomfort and vigilance led to chronic insomnia, frayed nerves, and sudden panic attacks in the darkness of her chambers. Fact 93. Elizabeth compelled her chambermaids to sample every scrap of leftover food before it reached her table. They were forced to swallow morsels that had turned rancid or grown slimy, and then describe the taste, texture, and odor in vivid detail. This nauseating ritual was her primary method of poison detection, a grotesque test of loyalty that left attendants physically ill, yet too terrified to refuse. Fact 94. In a cruel extension of her paranoia, she ordered her servants to consume food scraps from royal banquets, even when the dishes had spoiled days earlier. These forced loyalty trials served as a morbid performance of devotion. Any maid or footman who hesitated or showed disgust risked punishment. By turning food safety into a twisted game, she maintained absolute control and reinforced the dependency of her household. Fact 95. Among her most unsettling talismans was a necklace strung with preserved fingers from deceased prisoners. She believed these digits carried the power to ward off enemies and protect her from betrayal. Each brittle phalanx was polished and tied to a ribbon, then worn close to her throat. To Elizabeth, the macabre adornment served both as a symbol of her dominion and as an arcane safeguard against unseen threats. Fact 96. Her dental prosthesis was crafted from the very teeth of those she had sentenced to death. After executions, she collected molars from the condemned and had them mounted into a crude set of dentures. This practice not only concealed her own decayed teeth, but also forced her to consume fragments of her victims each time she bit down. It was a literal form of cannibalism, merging necessity with a grim assertion of power. Fact 97. In private gardens and courtyard enclosures, Elizabeth supervised the slaughter of animals as practice for refining her torture techniques. Under her gaze, dogs and livestock were subjected to mock executions, axes, bladders, and braking devices tested on living creatures. By observing how muscles convulsed and how cries of pain manifested, she honed her methods, ensuring that when applied to human prisoners, the suffering would be precise, prolonged, and inescapable. Fact 98. Perhaps her most disturbing experiment involved what she termed a gift of love. She ordered young, purportedly virgin girls to donate menstrual blood, which was then conjured into a ritualistic potion. Forced to ingest this brew, confessors endured a ceremony she believed could expose guilt through supernatural means. By weaponizing the biological process of adolescence, she transformed physiological pain into a dark rite, blending her obsession with purity, power, and occult influence. Fact 99. She kept the heads of executed prisoners in her private quarters and spoke to them as though they were living advisors. Believing the residual life force of the dead could offer her counsel, she would address the severed heads directly, imagining their responses and planning her next moves based on these imagined consultations. Fact 100. Elizabeth herself sketched detailed schematics of torture devices and protocols, annotating every muscle group, pressure point, and stage of agony. By cataloguing which actions caused maximum suffering without causing death, she effectively codified torture as a chilling discipline of precise, controlled cruelty. Fact 101. Upon her death, her attendants discovered her corpse amid piles of soiled clothing and human waste, having refused all cleansing and clothing changes in her final hours. The queen, who obsessed over image and power, died in unspeakable filth, a stark testament to the ruinous extremes she embraced. The video on 101 Shocking Facts about Queen Elizabeth I is more than a mere compilation of chilling details. It also offers viewers profound insights into how we perceive history and humanity. First, it reminds us that every glittering legend conceals shadows, and beauty or power does not necessarily go hand in hand with morality or empathy. Through revelations of self-destructive beauty rituals, abuse of poisons, superstitious medical practices, and cruelty even toward her closest attendants, we encounter a portrait that stands in stark contrast to the Virgin Queen icon passed down for generations. This encourages viewers to ask themselves, are we venerating an image while overlooking the real person behind it? Second, the film serves as a powerful warning about the consequences of unchecked authority and systemic violence. When power is not bounded by law or ethics, it can transform individuals into monsters willing to sacrifice the innocent in pursuit of ambition or control. Queen Elizabeth I did not merely employ torture as a political tool, she turned it into spectacle, treating other people's suffering as macabre entertainment, a clear demonstration that absolute power readily corrupts absolutely. Third, we learn a vital lesson about the power of information and historical record-keeping. Many of the facts in this video emerged from confidential documents, ambassadors' diaries, private correspondence, or suppressed medical files. This underscores the importance of consulting and cross-referencing multiple sources to avoid being misled by official histories written by the victors. The revelations in the video remind us that every historical event has many dimensions, and we must approach the past with an open mind, asking critical questions rather than accepting everything at face value. Finally, the video prompts viewers to reflect on themselves in our modern lives. Might we inadvertently repeat similar mistakes? Do we let vanity dictate our health choices? Ignore professional medical advice? Or use our own influence to manipulate or oppress others? By confronting these uncomfortable parallels, viewers have the opportunity to examine their own attitudes, strengthen their sense of personal and social responsibility, and nurture compassion as a safeguard against the corrupting lure of power.